I did want to make this video earlier, but I was waiting for Patricia Nonis, that vegan lawyer, to make a response to my last video on abortion, which she said that she was going to do, but it appears now that isn't happening. But I received enough comments to make a follow-up on this very important and serious subject, which needs more attention. There have also been updates on the abortion rights struggle in the US that are also worth discussing. And then finally, I'll talk about the time my ex-girlfriend had an abortion. The video on pro-life atheists and vegans was the longest video I'd ever made, so thank you to everyone who watched it and left a comment or a thumbs up. However, it also received the most thumbs down of any video I've made, and received many of what I would call disturbing comments. The majority of the thumbs down, I believe, came via Ask Yourself, who shared the video on his Discord, thus sending Dr. Avi and Ask Yourself fans over to simply downvote it and not actually watch it. I could tell from the comments that some of them watched a few minutes and then left a comment, not really understanding the context. They just wanted to defend their hero, Dr. Avi, who they admire for reasons that are unclear. As I showed in the video, Dr. Avi doesn't understand scientifically proven facts or how to make a coherent argument. Together, Ask Yourself, Dr. Avi, Patricia Nonis, Vegan Gains, and others represent a faction of right-leaning, deontological, anti-realist, nihilistic, animal rights activists. We can call them what they call themselves, the threshold deontologists. Threshold deontology is not a real philosophy or normative position. They don't want to pick between utility or intuition, so they try to have it both ways. But they are nihilistic in that they use pseudo-arguments like Hume's guillotine or the is-ought gap, and they don't believe that ethics come from logic or facts. Ask Yourself left a friendly comment calling me a coward because I won't debate him on his Discord. But the only subject he wants to debate is the is-ought gap, which I don't consider to be a logical argument, so there's nothing you can really argue about with a nihilist. I hope that Patricia can turn it around and get away from the Trump stuff. She says that she is a libertarian, but she doesn't really talk about libertarian topics like the drug war and expensive, unethical foreign wars perpetuated by Western governments at the behest of corporations. She said in her comment that she's not a conservative but a classical liberal. Yet in her video, The 5 Worst Ideas in the Free World, 4 out of 5 of her arguments are the same things you would hear Rush Limbaugh talk about, so what am I supposed to think? Dr. Avi did not comment or make a response, but his fans did. The majority of the comments were concerning confusion Dr. Avi's fans have. I should have better selected my quotes from him, but I really try to let people I comment on have their say with context so I won't be accused of misquoting them. Most of these Avi fans tried to backpedal and say that he's really pro-choice, even though I showed that he clearly is not. Most of the Dr. Avi fanboys pointed to the part in Vegan Gains debate where he said that he values sentience, but then says that abortions that occur at 7 weeks are still unethical, even though a 7-week-old embryo is not sentient. In no way can it possibly be considered sentient. So clearly he does not value sentience and was lying. At least one person in the comments got it and realized that, oh, this person I've been following for anti-speciesist arguments is actually a sexist who wants to make it illegal for women to see a doctor. Another one of his fans pointed me to a strange debate on a show called Politically Provoked. It was strange because it was a bunch of anti-women, anti-choicers who all share the same belief that women deserve to be second-class citizens, and yet they argue for hours about ridiculous topics like, when does life begin, at conception or birth? I was about 15 minutes into it before I realized that most of these guys are Christians, for fuck's sake. You can't argue ethics with people who believe in Santa Claus. Their brains are just too broken to think coherently. Ask Yourself can't even stand up to them and bails after about a half an hour. But not before expressing that his meta-ethics are nihilistic.
Like that's my honest view. Like I think, morals are just ultimately going to be like what our preferences are, right? I don't really know what else morals would be. And I don't think we know what accounts for all of our preferences. So I think that why question can be very hard to answer.
Why would you want to get your ethics from someone who doesn't even know where they come from? I mean, at least with these Christians, you know where they get their ethics, deluded and preposterous as they are. Then Dr. Avi, who I admit is a patient man, actually tries to engage with the Christians.
A line like why is the 8, what did you say, 8 weeks is when?
Yeah, 8 weeks estimated gestational days, which translates into about 6 weeks fetal age. They're about 2 weeks apart, and depending on how you measure it. And the reason that I have it there is because that is the earliest point in time at which there is evidence that increases the probability, that provides justification, which is just to increase the probability of the proposition being true that the fetus is sentient.
To them, Dr. Avi is pro-choice because he is fine with an abortion before 8 weeks. He's changed it to 8 weeks in this video. I do want to make a correction since I know Dr. Avi has nitpicked this in other debates that I've watched. I mentioned in my last video that the Texas anti-abortion law and Dr. Avi's position would both effectively ban almost all abortions, as most women do not know that they're pregnant before week 6. However, I just wanted to post some CDC statistics for clarity. This is from 19thnews.org. Quote, in 2018, the most recent year for which the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has data, more than 92% of abortions took place at or by the 13th week. Almost 78% took place at or before 9 weeks of pregnancy. That same year, about 36% of abortions, just over a third, were performed at or before 6 weeks. That indicates that the majority of abortions occur between 6 and 13 weeks of gestation. A 6-week ban would prohibit the procedure at a point when almost 2/3 of people who would have sought an abortion haven't yet terminated their pregnancy, according to those numbers, end quote. So, Dr. Avi's position would be for allowing legal abortions around a third of the time. As he believes strangely that abortions that occur after 8 weeks are unethical and should be illegal, he is in line with the pro-life Texas abortion law, so his position is firmly anti-abortion, anti-women. The pro-choice argument is that it's a woman's choice, no matter what week of gestation the fetus is at. And the anti-natalist position is that 0% of abortions are unethical. I found out from this Politically Provoked video that Ask Yourself shares Dr. Avi's pro-life, anti-woman view on abortion. Dr. Avi clearly values the quote-unquote life of a fetus more than that of a fully sentient adult human female. And that is what I don't understand about the pro-life position. I guess Dr. Avi is staying true to his threshold philosophy, strange as it is. But these Christian guys are against abortion because of their Bible and no other reason. I thought Avi's and Patricia's arrogance was distasteful, but arrogance from a credulous fairytale believer is even worse. They attribute a holiness to life, making them worse than the average atheist natalist. They are no better than Muslims or flat earthers or any other fanatic who's addicted to lies and lying. Some asshole named Luke Rudloff again said that Avi only cares about harming a sentient being, but I've shown that his view is reducible to egg and sperm rights, even though he says that his view is not. He said that for a reason, because dumb people like Luke Rudloff believe whatever people tell them and don't do any critical thinking. Dr. Avi is against 7-week embryos getting aborted because they have potential to be sentient if they are fully developed. An unfertilized egg also has potential to be sentient, therefore menstruation is bad in his view. Just like there are no valid arguments for Carnism, there is no valid argument for pro-life. Speaking of veganism, I got an offensive comment from someone named Mate Jackalick2, who also made his comment on Inmendham's channel, because I guess he wanted to annoy and offend as many vegan anti-natalists as possible. He is another one of those Sarah Perry types who, with no scientific data or evidence whatsoever, claims that they just don't feel good on a plant-based diet. All of the evidence is that meat is poison to the human body, but they know better. This person did not experience severe health issues because of a vegan diet. I in no way believe that to be true. What happened is he doesn't know how to feed himself, and that's sad. Just like with exercise, people who have never even read a book on the subject feel like they are experts based on their own uneducated opinion. How are you supposed to know your ideal macro and micronutrient ratios if you don't do any research? I don't really need any bro science in my comment section, thank you, which I get all the time on my fitness channel. If you want to claim that meat has a health benefit to humans, then you have to prove it, and you can't, because all the evidence states the opposite. You just want to justify your selfish cruelty. This person clearly has not watched Inmendham's many videos on Carnism, or any of mine, or any whatsoever. Even if your health suffers from eating the thousands and thousands of plant foods there are available, you're still not off the hook to kill and maim animals. You then have to justify why your suffering is more important than their suffering, and you can't do that either. I mean, at some point you're going to have to take responsibility for your existence, because no one is going to do it for you. You might want to think about your convenience and how much you're willing to do for that convenience. Will you kill for it? Will you inflict torture for it? Just because you like the drive-thru window and are too lazy to go to a vegan restaurant or make your own food from readily available ingredients? If you appreciate my videos like you said you did, then why would you come on my channel trying to debunk a cruelty-free diet unless you wanted to be an asshole? Because you should have known that I wouldn't appreciate it. You know, I'm trying to do the opposite in these videos, get you to stop torturing animals for your convenience. If it were true that a vegan diet is unhealthy, why doesn't most of China and India have all these problems that you supposedly have? No, the opposite is true, that people who eat vegetarian and vegan have less heart disease and cancer. Check out the China study for more info on that. Inmendham's response to this commenter is over on his website, donotgod.com, and I'll put a link below where you can find that. The poet YouTuber Clear Mind made similar sentiments in his interview on exploring antinatalism. He tried to perpetuate the myth that vegan food is not widely available and is too expensive. Well, my wife goes to Europe sometimes and has no problem at all eating vegan in Germany or Switzerland. It's just as easy as it is to do in the US, which is super easy. Just walk past the meat section in the grocery store without stopping. It's not hard. Glance at a label before buying it. There are plenty of convenience foods like frozen vegetables that make it easy to cook for yourself. And you can't get cheaper than beans and rice. Vegan Footsoldier made a couple of comments under the video, but made no counter arguments. He said it was slander to call an abortion prohibitionist like himself a sexist misogynist because pro-life advocates don't consider themselves to be bigoted against women. Well, that was exactly the point of my video, to show people what they really are and what the consequences of their advocacy are. For example, Carnists, that is meat and cheese eaters, people who buy products tested on animals, and people who buy pets from breeders, don't like being told that they hate animals, even though judging by their actions, they certainly do. Pro-life is an intrinsically anti-woman position, and those who promote depriving women of healthcare are bigots. He explained in one of his comments that he is not a deontologist, in fact, even though he expressed that he loved Kant in some of his videos and clearly used Kantian philosophy. But instead, he said that he was Wittgensteinian. So if you know philosophy, then you know what that means. He was a nihilist. Perhaps I was a bit harsh in my last video where I said that his content had no value. I mean, his message of living a cruelty-free lifestyle without animal products had some value. He has some musical talent, but he just get a lot of silly baggage along with all of that. I don't think he really understood philosophy or consistency very well. He also wore a mask in all of his videos, which was very strange. Another asshole called Assassin9958 said my video was, quote, typical vegan cult nonsense, end quote. There is no vegan cult. It's an ethical position and lifestyle. There is no cult leader, no secret knowledge, and no customs or holy texts. Just stop causing animals to be born into slavery and slaughter. That's it. Carnism and natalism go together philosophically, like veganism and anti-natalism. In his debate with Vegan Gains, Dr. Avi kept using this term as no definition that I could find on the internet, what he called a symmetry breaker. It made no sense because I didn't detect any symmetry in his premises. For some reason, the threshold deontologists like to make up their own lexicon of terms rather than use the ones that everyone else is using. Aravind Venkatsaramanian said that I made no attempt to understand Avi's position and didn't understand threshold deontology. So this is clearly someone who just came over to downvote the video and didn't actually watch it. I think I've made more comments on threshold deontology than just about anybody. I thoroughly studied and went over Dr. Avi's pseudo-arguments in detail and patiently explained and refuted them. Z. Harkius asked this commenter to go ahead and explain then what a symmetry breaker is. He said, quote, "When you have two situations that are similar, but your actions are different, you need to specify what is the factor that justifies doing X in one situation and Y in a similar situation," end quote. And he then gives the example of killing as the action, with killing a plant and an animal being the two symmetrical situations. So as I thought, the symmetry breaker idea doesn't make any sense because plants and animals, other than being alive, are not at all symmetrical. One suffers and one doesn't. Killing a plant or an animal are two completely different scenarios. Marquis then explained to this deluded Avi fan that killing a non-sentient embryo is not symmetrical with killing an adult, human or animal. Aravind responds by quoting Avi's nonsensical premises. Quote 1, "There is some evidence for fetal sentience," end quote. That's at 7 weeks, Avi is claiming, and that is not true. That is a lie. There is no evidence for fetal sentience at 7 weeks. Quote 2, "Dependence was instantiated." Avi is saying that making a non-sentient life form like a plant dependent on you, like by planting a seed, is somehow unethical. Based on zero evidence. Yet another false, unproven premises. Premise 3 is just stating premise 2 again, that dependence was imposed on non-sentient mush. Who cares? Quote 4, "The parents had the knowledge of the possibility of dependence happening," end quote. So he is again trying to say that making something non-sentient be dependent on you for, say, nutrition is wrong, based on absolutely nothing. Here he is also trying to shame people for having sex, just like vegan Footsoldier. And then premise 5, the most ridiculous of them all, quote, "The disutility," end quote. So we have a deontologist here trying to switch over to utility suddenly. Quote, "The disutility generated is approximate to the disutility generated by the average pregnancy," end quote. This is a wildly false premise based again on no evidence. The disutility generated by procreation far, far outweighs the disutility of abortion, of which there is very little. Pregnancy causes a lifetime of harm to the agent being created and all of the harm done in the world. It's illogical for a vegan to say that, as a newly created person is most likely going to be a Carnist animal abuser. For that reason alone, procreation is unethical. So, besides getting thumbs down from Ask Yourself and Dr. Avi fans, I assume I also got a few from Republican antinatalists and vegans. I got a few comments that justify this belief. Even though in my video I never said that I was a Democrat or a leftist, I don't support either of the two US political parties. Both parties are pro-war, pro-drug prohibition, and pro-income tax, among many other similarities. So to me, it's really a one-party system with only the illusion of choice. And the Democrat Party is so right, really, now. There really is no left party in the United States. Austin R. said, quote, "Right-wing doesn't equal bigot," end quote. I never said that it does. I said that being anti-abortion makes one bigoted against women. You do tend to have more bigots on the right, but not exclusively so. For example, the current US President, Joe Biden, recently and publicly professed his own racism and sexism for all the world to see. He made a campaign promise and is now carrying it out to place a black woman on the Supreme Court. Many people on the left applauded this sexist and racist agenda. So the next justice, who has a lifetime appointment by the way, will not be chosen because of the content of his or her character, but merely to allow the president to virtue signal and appear progressive when really he's just another lying crook. So that tells young Americans that your skin and sex is more important than who you are as a person and the reputation you may have built for yourself. It means that any federal judge who was male, Asian, Hispanic, or white was eliminated from the consideration right at the start, merely because they were born with a Y chromosome or had ancestry from somewhere other than Africa. I mean, this should have been universally condemned as being counter to what the civil rights movement was all about. You might think that a woman would be a good choice for SCOTUS because she would be less likely to ban abortion, but the other woman who just became a justice during the Trump administration is a religious pro-life lunatic.
I must begin these very brief remarks by thanking God for delivering me to this point in my professional journey. My life has been blessed beyond measure, and I do know that one can only come this far by faith.
Austin R. goes on to say, quote, I watch Steven Crowder and other right-wing voices because they're the only ones talking any sense on the most pressing political issues, apart from abortion, of course. Modern leftism is insane and has gone completely off the rails. As of now, conservatives are living closer to reality than progressives. I fully admit I used to identify among them. Although I've been red-pilled to an extent, it doesn't contradict the ethical true north that is negative utilitarianism. I agree this lady, like most humans, are walking contradictions. Thanks for sharing, Life Sucks. I mentioned the right-wing conservative Republican, whatever word works for you, radio and YouTube host Steven Crowder, because he said that killing plants was equal to killing animals, therefore making him a moron, and as confused as Dr. Avi, who said that killing a non-sentient clump of cells was murder. Steven Crowder himself is unashamedly bigoted against women, animals, and gay people. He wears a shirt on his show that says socialism is for fags, for example. So Austin R. is saying that because he and Crowder are anti-socialism, political correctness, or whatever it is he finds appealing about this man, then they are allies, even though Crowder is a Christian, pro-life, anti-gay, pro-meat eating, in addition to being very stupid. So because he is for the one thing you agree with, you can forgive everything else. This, to me, is not very logical. This is like being a sports fan who's rooting for both teams at the same time. Austin R. must really, really hate liberals to sink to watching Steven Crowder. I don't want to say that I hate the government because then I would sound like some anarchist kook, but I do pretty much hate everyone in the government. I really feel that Inmendham is correct, that the penalty for lying as a public official has to be drastically severe, so bad that one would be crazy to even try it. But it's just so obvious that they're lying and people still vote for them. So it's really not the politicians' fault, it's the fault of the people who vote for them. It's sad. I don't think that an antinatalist should support pro-life organizations or pundits. Even if I hated the libtards that much, I wouldn't want to support a pro-life Christian YouTuber personally. It's pretty obvious why liberals are going woke, if wokeness is what you hate. Because they aren't doing anything for the working class anymore, so they have to find causes that rich and poor liberals can get behind. Democrats are pro-drug war, which is a war on the working class and the poor. The rich don't use street drugs. They get the good shit from the pharmacy. Steven Crowder has the largest independent news channel on YouTube. He's a transphobe, homophobe, misogynist, and he is even against sex with girls. Yes, he is even against heterosex, as evidenced by this article he wrote, trying to convince people not to fuck. He didn't get laid until he was 30 and has only fucked one woman his entire life. So this is someone you should go to get advice and commentary on sexual politics? This guy? A guy who wears a gun holster with extra ammo clips on his YouTube show to look tough? You know, fine. Make hating the SJWs your life's mission. Spend all of your fucking time watching Republican YouTubers who constantly talk about the libtards. But don't pretend that you're doing something useful. Because if you're clicking on Republican videos and giving them views and thumbs up, then you are supporting religion. I can't support many liberal activists because they themselves are racists and promote ideas like equity and white guilt. The left or the right is not the enemy. The rich are the enemy. The poor and the working class can only put up with so much bread and circuses and divide and conquer. That is how the rich keep you tranquil and entertained. Free speech is controlled and limited by monopolies like Google and Facebook. I would just warn against getting too into pop politics, which many people are, unfortunately. It's not really a productive pursuit. It makes you hate your fellow Americans when we're all working class, and the obvious enemy is the billionaire class. Not necessarily the 1%, because you only need a net worth of around 11 million to be in the 1%. It's the 100 millionaires and the 1,000 millionaires who are the problem. The reason there haven't been lynchings is because things aren't that bad yet. You know, just wait until people can't afford food. Autisticus Spasticus said, quote, "It may surprise you, but not all antinatalists are liberals and wokesters. I come from a dissident right background, for instance," end quote. I guess it does surprise me a little bit, honestly, because for me, the religiosity of the Republican Party And the right in general, especially their activism to ban abortion, makes them counter to my goals. You have to agree with the pro-life agenda just to join the Republican Party. I don't know much about the dissident right. Is that the same as the alt-right? But they appear to be extremely religious and anti-abortion, so I don't know why an antinatalist would want to be a part of that cause. Some of these comments make one question whose one's allies are and whose one's enemies are. It's often said that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, but I would also say that the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So even though someone claims to be an antinatalist and watches antinatalist content, if they also claim to be part of the dissident right and support their natalist agenda, then whose side are they really on? For example, like I would like to support Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins, but they're both natalists, Carnists, and Sam Harris at least is pro-war, so I just have to throw up my hands in disgust and say, fuck them. I don't really want to be on that team because their ideals and ethics are all out of whack. Like, I want the deontological antinatalists on my side. You know, they tend to agree with the asymmetry, consent, and imposition arguments. But recently, on exploring antinatalism, there was a philosopher who subscribed to the ridiculous divine command theory, which is just a form of theism called deism. It's God belief without religion. It was popular in the 18th century, but I don't see any place for it now. I think as a consequentialist, I would want the antinatalist position to have all the support it can get, even from the deluded and the credulous, but I also think that these ideas are very dangerous. Even deontology can lead people to some very wrong ethical positions, like Julio Cabrera, who is anti-abortion. He holds the extremely misguided view that killing an embryo is the same as killing an adult. So he falls into the same error that Dr. Avi makes in assigning the same value to a non-sentient piece of nothing as you would a fully sentient child or adult. He thinks that terminating an embryo that doesn't have a brain violates its consent, and his view really baffles me. I don't really even consider him to be an antinatalist because of his weird view on abortion. You can distill his view into, again, egg and sperm rights. So when an egg is not fertilized, you should err on the side of caution and respect that we cannot get consent to impose life and death. Yet, if the egg is fertilized, then magically that egg has rights, and we should allow it to be born, allow it to experience the harms of life, suffering, and death, because now that it is fertilized, aborting would be violating its consent, according to his view. This philosophy doesn't make any logical sense. Because of his view on abortion, Julio Cabrera is a natalist, and his philosophy is pretty much useless nonsense. That there can be pro-lifers even in the antinatalist community, like what the fuck is the world coming to? While I was working on this video, I saw that Cory McCarthy made a video of sorts about abortion. Longtime subscribers of this channel know that I've made several response videos to Cory McCarthy, of which he has made 0 responses to. Although he does call out antinatalists in his latest video, so I assume that he saw them. Cory McCarthy never got the attention that his ex-girlfriend, Tara McCarthy, got. I mentioned her in my last video. Perhaps it's because bigoted conservative men on YouTube are a dime a dozen, but openly racist, attractive females are somewhat rare. He has basically retired from YouTube, so there isn't anything to respond to anymore, and after I made my last video about his conversion to Catholicism, people in the comments complained because I think they thought Cory McCarthy was too lowbrow to respond to, and now that he's a Christian, I have to agree. But since this is an abortion-themed video, and there is very little stuff to respond to, and for old time's sake, why not? Cory McCarthy has a YouTube channel primarily to sell his ebooks on fitness and nutrition, 2 subjects that he knows next to nothing about, but that doesn't usually stop most people.
Those of you who follow me on Facebook, or rather have connected with me on Facebook, will know that I have a child. And while it's very exciting, it's a very time-consuming thing, raising a child. According to Pew Research, Christians are having over twice as many children than atheists or agnostics. To provide specific examples, Catholics and Mormons are having 2.5 and 3.4 children per family on average, respectively. And this is versus atheists and agnostics, who are having only 1.3 to 1.6 children per family on average, respectively. Conservatives are having over 34% more children than liberals are. It should go without saying that as a Christian, I am opposed to abortion. However, with that being said, I am not responsible for randoms of the public, nor do I wish to have that level of responsibility. In other words, if Jenny down the block wants to terminate her pregnancy, that has nothing to do with me, and my disapproval would very likely mean jack shit to her, nor would it likely have any impact on her decision. However, as fucked up as the world is, there is at least one silver lining to this, I suppose. Liberals, atheists, and agnostics are simply not having enough children to sustain their demographics. In fact, their birth rates are as much as 47% below replacement levels. Whereas Christians, on the other hand, are the polar opposite, really, with as much as 47% above replacement levels when it comes to their birth rates. Perhaps this progressive die-off, as it were, is why the left and the left-wing establishment constantly attack the traditional family unit and seek to indoctrinate children in schools and through the media, and worse yet, behind their parents' backs in secret, as we are seeing Florida battle right now. The left knows that with their declining birth rates, that their ideology is doomed. It's doomed to go extinct with them, as they bow out without making any meaningful contributions to the gene pool, as it is through our children that we pass on our beliefs and our skills, etc., to the next generation. And the same can be said of the anti-natalists and their ideology as well. As they, by definition, should not be breeding at all. That is, if they actually live by the philosophy that they preach and aren't just total fucking hypocrites. And to underscore my previous point, the results from the Gallup Youth Survey show that 71% of teens hold the same social and political views as their parents. This is why homeschooling is such a vital approach for conservatives and Christians to absolutely rob the left of their desperate chance, their desperate effort to instill their disgusting, distorted, degenerate beliefs into other people's children and therefore into the next generation.
I think the real reason that he made his first video in 6 months was simply to announce that he finally committed the ultimate crime, procreation. Like most entitled breeders, he was probably expecting some pats on the back, salutations, and congratulations. He also used this opportunity to criticize atheism, anti-natalism, and of course, the evil liberals. However, his argument is that abortion is good from a consequentialist perspective because he believes that liberals, anti-natalists, and atheists, people who are more likely to seek abortion, are going to go extinct. So all that will be left are Christian conservatives like him. Again, I'm sorry to respond to such a dumb video because, wow, this one is really dumb. So Cory thinks that philosophy is inherited. He really seems to believe that. That is why, in his view, the left is trying to indoctrinate children into liberal belief systems because they know that they aren't producing enough new liberals via procreation. He fails to mention that religious Republican assholes are just as pushy with their bullshit and are just as intent on imposing the stupidity of religion and religious values onto everyone else. As Lynn Plattrow, the director of the National Advocates for Pregnant Women, said recently, quote, "For the past 50 years, anti-abortion activists, i.e. Christian Republicans, have been trying to groom people in the US to view pregnant women as criminals," end quote. So fuck off with this liberal grooming nonsense. Because of this conspiracy theory, the backwards Republican state of Florida has passed a law called Parental Rights in Education. It's institutionalized gay bigotry and homophobia. It states, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3, or in a manner that is not age-appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards, end quote. So if a kid with gay parents shows up to a school in Florida, his parents' lifestyle is completely off limits to talk about. Republicans think that mentioning the word gay will make kids gay, and the implication is that being gay is wrong. How can you antinatalists be a part of the Republican Party? If you call yourself an antinatalist, then obviously you should be for gay relationships, as they don't lead to pregnancy. I'm not sure why he called out antinatalists because, yeah, it's pretty fucking obvious. If an antinatalist is also a breeder, then they would be a hypocrite. But what antinatalists are breeding exactly? It would be very well deserved if Cory McCarthy's kid turns out to be a gay liberal meat eater. He's too dumb to realize that that's a possibility. In fact, it's just as likely his kid will rebel and do the exact opposite of what his daddy wants. He mentions a Gallup poll from 2005, so 17 years ago, that found that 70% of teenagers were voting like their parents. However, the article he linked, which discusses this survey, states right in the very same sentence that, quote, more recent work suggests that parents who insist on their political views at home are more likely to see their children abandon those beliefs in college, end quote. So, no, sorry, Cory, there is no data to support your master plan on engineering a religious Republican majority. This is why his channel sucks so bad. He's been doing this for years. He thinks that he can just grab some study or survey, even if it's already been debunked, and peddle that as truth. He has apparently not heard the news that belief in God is on the decline in the US. Cory also ignores all of the survey data that shows that the more educated someone is, the less dumb they'll be, and therefore the less likely they'll fall for the God delusion. Cory converted to Catholicism as a grown adult, which makes him one of the dumber people in America. Moving on, I'm surprised that more antinatalists are not covering the American abortion crisis, but then again, there's very little antinatalist content on YouTube these days. Inmendham has taken his videos off the platform to protest the canceling of Forever Wolf films. You can find his videos on his website. I was glad to see the Anti-Bullshit Man, or as he is now known, No Avail, made a contribution to the discussion. It was mostly a preamble to a more in-depth video he has to come. He posted a link to what he said is going around philosophy circles as the supposed best defense for secular or atheist anti-abortion. It's called Why Abortion is Immoral by Dan Marquis from the Journal of Philosophy, April 1989. Anti-Bullshit Man said that he may do an in-depth breakdown of this paper, which I look forward to. But I thought I would at least try to break down his base argument and refute it from the anti-natalist perspective. This author comes at it from a Kantian point of view, so before I get into it, I should probably go over the pro-deontology comments I got from the last video. I don't know how to pronounce his name because it has symbols in it, but it may be Hypatia. He first examined why someone like Patricia Nonis is promoting anti-woman positions when she is a woman. He says that it could be, quote, a way out of being a target of hate. Internalized misogyny is a state of indoctrination in which a woman tries to distance herself from her own sex, a form of denial, the underlying subconscious logic of which goes something like, if I align my beliefs to the beliefs of society, then I can get more acceptance in exchange from those who would otherwise hate me even more. I at least get some degree of legitimacy from the majority, the powerful, etc. In a woman-hating culture, even some women benefit from hating other women as a form of reverse virtue signaling. End quote. That could be true. I surmised in the video that maybe she was trying to become a part of a libertarian pro-life clique at her school. It seems like there has to be some motive other than reason. The abortion prohibition arguments don't make any logical sense. But in that same comment, he said that I am, quote, consistently and demonstrably wrong on Kant, end quote. He is asked by another commenter to elaborate, so he does in detail. You can pause the video if you want to read it. What I criticize in my videos is the philosophy of deontology, also known as Kantianism, for its founder, Immanuel Kant. Deontology has evolved, just as utilitarianism has evolved since Jeremy Bentham. Like most defenders of Kant, like vegan Footsoldier, he says that it would take a book to explain Kant, which is not good. Utility can be summed up in one sentence: act in a way that does the least harm to the greatest number. Hypatia said, quote, if an ethical statement can be presented to the satisfaction of reason using the tools of reason, understanding, logic, a priori, relational truths, a simplified example, a thing with the same value needs to be treated the same. any difference in treatment needing logically correct justification, which does not contradict the first premise, then it must be accepted as true. That is, we don't need the universe or gods to objectively ground valid ethical principles independently of human understanding, because the validation of reason through logic and the understanding of the facts is all we need, and actually have, to have universally valid, aka true ethical statements, end quote. So that is where we disagree. For a utilitarian, the consequences are all that matter, and we use logic to determine as best we can what the best outcome will be. A priori truth is what I have a problem with, and I explained that in my last video. There is no evidence for a priori or instinctive moral truth. This is where deontology for me goes off the rails into the realm of pseudoscience. He did say that, quote, literally everything Life Sucks explained in his video is correct in my assessment. He simply attributes views to Kant which are not actually his views, end quote. He said that things I attributed to Kant were more likely to come from Hume, but he didn't say exactly what. But it doesn't really matter. What I was critiquing was Kantian philosophy, and why it isn't as good as utilitarianism as a normative ethic. That is not to say that deontological antinatalists, atheists, and vegans don't have something to contribute. It seems to have wide acceptance in the philosophy sphere. But either consequences are the way to judge an action from being good or bad, or as Kant believed, someone's motives are the way to judge it as right and wrong. It can't be both. Kant, to me, is illogical because good intentions can often lead to bad consequences, such as more net suffering in the world. So, with that in mind, let's get into this lauded anti-abortion paper from 30 years ago. Marquis begins, quote, no doubt most philosophers affiliated with secular institutions of higher education believe that the anti-abortion position is either a symptom of irrational religious dogma or a conclusion generated by seriously confused philosophical argument. The purpose of this essay is to undermine that general belief. This essay sets out an argument that purports to show, as well as any argument in ethics can show, that abortion is, except possibly in rare cases, seriously immoral, and is in the same moral category as killing an innocent adult human being. End quote. So he realizes right away that his position is considered to be ridiculous by the majority of philosophers and atheists, as it is very ridiculous. He compares abortion to killing an innocent adult human being. So that is a loaded statement right away. Who is innocent and innocent of what? Any utilitarian knows that the rightness or wrongness of killing someone is entirely built upon the circumstances. If, an innocent person is in your way and you're on a mission to prevent the suffering of 1 million persons, then you can rightfully kill that person. It's not ideal, but you have to do what you have to do for the greater good. Committing one small crime to prevent a much greater crime would be logical under utilitarianism, but a deontologist would not kill even one person despite the consequences. Some basic problems I have with this paper are: it is pre-Benatar, therefore it misses entirely the truth that procreation is an unethical imposition of harm and death on someone. He gives too much weight to the pro-life view without having justified it. He makes the mistake of calling pro-life and pro-abortion symmetrical positions when they are not at all. He speaks as though the reader accepts that rights and duties are real things, when utilitarians reject that they are natural or real, except in a legal sense. He does address the question why killing someone is wrong, and for him it is because, quote, the loss of one's life deprives one of all the experiences, activities, projects, and enjoyments that would otherwise have constituted one's future, end quote. He leaves out the suffering of life, conveniently, and he completely fails to see that procreation imposes death. It is in fact an act of premeditated homicide. When someone is murdered by another human being, that murderer is only completing the work of the victim's parents. This is the crux of his argument, and it does boil down once again to egg and sperm rights. He argues that death is bad, therefore causing death to an adult is wrong because it robs them of future pleasures, and he then makes the leap that aborting a non-sentient bit of protoplasm is also murder, robbing that protoplasm of its potential future. This argument is nothing new. Anti-abortionists use it all the time. He explains his view about halfway through the paper if you want to read it. Link will be in the description. He's trying to get away with not calling an embryo or fetus a person or equal to a person when he says, quote, "The category that is morally central to this analysis is the category of having a valuable future like ours. It is not the category of personhood," end quote. So he's playing semantic word games. An embryo has no desire for a future or the experiences, projects, activities that he claims are so valuable. The fact is, the future for most human beings only has negative value. They're not going to offer the world anything. They're just going to consume animals so that they can reproduce more victims. Strangely, he then makes the argument for veganism and incorrectly states that his argument is identical. What he's making a case for is the wrongness of procreation, not the wrongness of abortion. He then goes through a few counter arguments. He tries to guess what people are going to counter, including the comment, the comment I just made. Quote, "Finally, Paul Basson has argued that even though the prospects of an embryo might seem to be a basis for the wrongness of abortion, an embryo cannot be a victim and therefore cannot be wronged. An embryo cannot be a victim," he says, "because it lacks sentience. His central argument for this seems to be that even though plants and the permanently unconscious are alive, they clearly cannot be victims. What is the explanation of this? Basson claims that the explanation is that their lives consist of mere metabolism, and mere metabolism is not enough to ground victimizability. No shit. Mentation is required. The problem with this attempt to establish the absence of victimizability is that both plants and the permanently unconscious clearly lack what Basson calls prospects, or what I have called a future life like ours. Hence, surely it is open to one to argue that the real reason we believe plants and the permanently unconscious cannot be victims is that killing them cannot deprive them of a future life like ours," end quote. But now he opens himself up to an obvious counter-argument, and that is, if potential futures getting snuffed out is what's got your panties in a bunch, then you have to defend why miscarriages, periods, and ejaculations are not serious moral crimes. Just because an embryo could potentially become a scummy human being, so what? If this is his argument, the implication is that we should make as many people and animals as possible so that everyone can enjoy such wonderful future activities like shitting and sleeping. Nice try, but you can't make a victim out of something that doesn't have a brain. Just because it could develop a brain, so could every egg in a woman's body. Marquis then says, quote, "Of course, embryos can be victims. When their lives are deliberately terminated, they are deprived of their futures of value, their prospects. This makes them victims, for it directly wrongs them," end quote. He is making the classic reasoning error that so many of these pro-life atheists make, and that is to give the same value that a fully sentient human has to a glob of protoplasmic mush. No, you can't do this in ethics. There is no symmetry here. If a fairy had a magic wand and could turn a carrot into a cat, just because the potential exists, that doesn't mean that killing the carrot would be wrong. If I can psychoanalyze the writer of this paper, I would just assume that he started with the conclusion abortion is unethical, and then worked backwards trying to find any word games he could play to side with the religious nuts. Only a very special person, and I mean that in a negative way, can think that aborting a pregnancy on purpose is somehow wrong. It's just a laughably absurd position, and activists for it are even more absurd. He does go on to say that his view implies that contraception is also wrong, which it does, but he lazily tries to claim that it doesn't. His view also calls for impregnating as many women as possible to make more and more life, because life is great to him. He is projecting his Pollyanna love of existence onto others. Because he loves his life, he wants everyone to suffer just so they can have a chance to eat cake. I think that this paper is a joke, but I would be interested in No Avail's deep dive if he does it. I feel like it was pretty easy to punch holes through it. Benatar's argument alone destroys it, as coming into existence is always a harm. Therefore, abortion is ethical, and procreation is always unethical. Abortion update. As of this writing, we are still waiting to see what the Supreme Court says about states banning abortion. Abortions are still illegal in the state of Texas, forcing women to travel to other states to get one. Joe Biden went back on his campaign promise to repeal what is known as the Hyde Amendment, a provision that restricts the use of federal funds for abortions. It was named for a Catholic Republican, and it first passed in 1976. Biden formally supported it, as do other Democrats like Senator Tim Kaine, the party's 2016 presidential nominee, as do Senators Bob Casey of Pennsylvania and Joe Manchin of West Virginia. The Democrats succumbed to Republican pressure, throwing women under the bus, and agreed to keep the abortion funding ban. This is what I meant by a one-party system. Democrats had control of the Congress and the executive branch and didn't do anything significant. The Supreme Court is set to rule on a Mississippi law that bans most abortions after 15 weeks. That decision is most likely going to threaten Roe v. Wade. Tennessee is trying to pass an abortion ban modeled on the Texas law, and in Florida, Republicans just passed a bill modeled after Mississippi's, which is the one before the Supreme Court, and would outlaw any abortions after 15 weeks. I can't understand voting for Republicans when this is the thing they do with their power. Hurt women and hurt potential new people. It's really sickening. One of the good things I saw in the news recently was an activist named Jex Blackmore, who went on my local Fox affiliate and gave themselves an abortion on live TV right in front of a pro-life activist.
This here is mifepristone. This is the first of 2 pills you would take to end a pregnancy, and it would induce an abortion, this very pill, by blocking the hormone and allowing a pregnancy to grow. And I want to show you how easy it is and safe it is by taking it myself.
You're taking it. Are you? You're not pregnant, are you?
I would say that this is going to end a pregnancy. This would be my 3rd abortion.
And then when asked about what they would do if Roe v. Wade is overturned, I really liked their answer.
All right, there's another case going to come. Jex, real quick, your prediction on what this Supreme Court will do with the case that's in front of it right now.
I can't say for sure, and I also want to note that it doesn't actually matter because we are going to continue accessing abortion through shareabortionpill.info. We can manage our own abortion, and we've actually, through the mail, expanded and increased access to abortion more than we ever have before.
Women can't depend on the government to help them because they're clearly not going to. Abortion pills can be bought over the internet and delivered to your mailbox. If the feds try to ban this practice, there are ways around it. I liked how unashamed they were about their 3 abortions. This activist prefers the pronoun they, their, them, so that's why I use them. I know it can be a little confusing. A female anti-natalist YouTuber also talked openly about her abortions, so that made me less worried about talking about my experience. Obviously I'm a man, so it wasn't really my abortion experience. But my ex-girlfriend's abortion experience just wasn't a very good title for the video. I didn't talk about it before for a couple of reasons. One is because it involves someone else, but it's been 20 years, so I think it's okay to talk about it now. And secondly, it's just a bit embarrassing for a lifelong anti-natalist to have impregnated a woman. It was probably the biggest bullet dodge of my life. It's extremely disturbing to me to consider that I could possibly have created someone who would be an adult now. But this experience was definitely harder on her than it was on me. I didn't have to go through the embarrassing procedure, for example. This experience is one reason why I find people like Vegan Footsoldier and other pro-lifers so offensive when they say that getting pregnant is due to irresponsibility. I have been as responsible as just about any man can be during my love affairs. My partners and I usually used more than 1 form of birth control, and I currently use 3, including vasectomy. No form of birth control, even vasectomy, is 100% foolproof. So if you responsibly use birth control and have sex with your partner 100 times, then you're still at risk 9 out of those times of using the birth control pill, or 15 of those times with condoms. My ex-girlfriend was on the birth control pill when it happened. We would use secondary methods such as withdrawal, but a few times we just relied on the pill alone. The anxiety for a male is that you have to trust your partner and trust that they are taking their birth control correctly for its maximum effectiveness. Whether or not she missed a day or didn't take it at the same time every day like you're supposed to, only she knows. But I realize that it's placing the burden fully on the woman. I take responsibility for my part and don't blame her. Not that either of us should feel any shame for getting pregnant. It's staying pregnant that's wrong. We took our relationship seriously and responsibly, and when we started to get serious with each other, we had the talk. What happens if the birth control fails and you get pregnant? We both agreed that abortion was the only option, and it's important for people who are in a sexual relationship to have this talk. And sure enough, I remember this vividly. I was working on my computer, and my girlfriend came over and sat down and said, "Matt, don't freak out, but I have to have an abortion." I was in total shock and disbelief. I knew friends who went through this, but I didn't think that it would happen to me, of course. I thought that I had been so careful. We never just had sex without some form of protection, although I shouldn't have left her carrying the majority of the responsibility. She stayed true to her word, and we set up an appointment at Planned Parenthood in Ann Arbor. Here's some video I took of religious assholes protesting a block away from the clinic many years later. I'm grateful that no protesters were there that day. I might have lost my cool. I think that the clinic may have a restraining order against these Catholic pro-life groups because they usually protest down the street at the main intersection rather than right in front of the building. This is another thing that annoys the hell out of me. This is a Catholic church across the street from my mom's first assisted living apartment. They put these crosses out every year to represent all the tragic deaths of non-sentient embryos. But where are the crosses for all the people murdered by birth? Well, they don't give a shit about them. This organization gets to own this property without paying any property tax or income tax. What is wrong with our society that openly sexist organizations are subsidized by taxpayers and allowed to spread their hateful propaganda? My ex-girlfriend was very nervous, so I tried to teach her some of my meditative breathing techniques to calm her down. In the waiting room, there's a teenage girl who had a couple of friends there to support her. Michigan enforces a law called the Parental Consent Abortion Law, or the Judicial Bypass Law. This law requires any minor under the age of 18 to have one parent's consent to have an abortion, or they must obtain a judicial bypass from a judge. So this is just a form of religiously imposed abortion restriction. This girl was extremely upset and distraught. I am glad that she at least had some friends there. Another woman was there completely alone, and another woman had her boyfriend there to support her. Another religiously imposed abortion hurdle placed before women in my state, and I know that this is common in other US states and European states as well. A woman is required to go to a counseling session and then wait 24 hours before she can have an abortion. This was the point at which in the film Nymphomaniac, where the main character decides that she has had enough of going through other people's bullshit hoops and takes matters into her own hands by giving herself an abortion. This is just another tactic in the pro-life Christian movement, because some women are just going to be too lazy to go through all this, and some might even be convinced to keep their baby. But now, with the abortion pill, women don't need to deal with this offensive pro-life Christian nonsense anymore. Afterwards, the women go to a recovery room where they put a heat pad on their stomach, over their uterus for the pain. But nowadays, these women could probably just have gotten an abortion pill, and that would have been it. I felt bad that I had put her through this. Even though it was the right thing to do, it can be traumatic for a woman. And of course, it's not free. This abortion was subsidized by the state, so we only had to pay either $300 or $600. It was so long ago that I can't actually remember, but I remember that we split it between us. We were both in our early 20s and working part-time jobs. Even if I wasn't against procreation in general, having a kid would have been irresponsible with our financial situation. Another part of the experience that wasn't fun for me was as we were leaving and making our payment, I realized that the clerk was someone I had worked with at the hospital. She looked down at the paperwork and then quickly flipped it over for privacy, but obviously she read it. So that was a little embarrassing, that someone you knew out in the outside world, knows your business, your very private business. Even though I don't think we should feel any shame, I still felt awkward. I'd just come way too close to the ultimate crime of being a father. I just wish I'd gotten sterilized at 19 if it were possible. Pregnancy anxiety affected me for many years after that. I found it hard to trust women I dated. Especially the serious girlfriend I had after that. I feel bad for her because I just never completed inside of her even once. I was too paranoid. Eventually, I would later date women who I trusted, and even one who had had a hysterectomy, so that relationship was paranoia-free. It never happened again, but I always had to have the conversation with them about what we would do if it happened. My ex moved out of state soon after that, and that pretty much ended the relationship. I did stay in touch with her for some years afterwards, though, and like a few of my other exes, she did end up having kids later in life. If the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade, then abortion will become illegal again in Michigan. I don't know what we would have done if that were the case back then, but we probably would have had to drive to another state, just like the women in Texas are having to do. Making medical care illegal for women is clearly sexism and misogyny in practice. I don't know why someone would vote for it, even if their church told them to. My mom was a Catholic, but she wasn't insane enough to be anti-choice. I think that she should have abandoned her church over this issue. But, as she got older, she did attend less and less. But all pro-choice Catholics should never tithe to an organization if they really care about women's rights. If you're in a relationship, then an implant or an IUD is 99% effective. So with that and vasectomy, you should be covered. Vasectomy is also very highly effective. But even so, it can still happen, so abortion must remain legal. Of course, there are always going to be people who can't control their impulses and have sex with no protection at all. I'm not going to shame them because they're just animals behaving like animals. So as long as they seek abortion, which should be legal in every state, I don't really care. We shouldn't necessarily shame parents who become antinatalists after having kids either. Many people have kids when they are young and stupid, and everyone makes mistakes. Recognizing those mistakes takes insight and courage. So we should definitely welcome them into this movement, as they might even become our most effective activists. Thanks for sticking with my second abortion video. I honestly had a hard time finishing this one. Part of it was having no response videos to talk about, so I had to find some other material. But I also couldn't get the visuals right this time. I originally was just going to do this as a quick response to some comments and show some of the video footage I took over the winter. But when I read the script, it was an hour long and I only had about 15 minutes of video at most. So I had another idea for a drawing, but I couldn't get it to where I thought it was effective and tasteful. Like in this original drawing, I realized that I had already done 2 drawings on this channel where a woman has her legs spread, giving birth. So it seemed like I was repeating myself, and it just didn't seem that dignified. But I wanted to show the pro-life atheists and vegans that this is what you're imposing on women for the crime of having sex. It's depriving them of medical care and forcing them to be pregnant. So I tried it again, and it still was not working for me. Then I came up with the idea that it might be better to show a woman after she has attempted to give herself an unsafe abortion. This is what these sick maniacs want for women. There is no decent way to be a pro-life, anti-abortion activist. Why a vegan atheist especially would hold such a sexist, barbaric view just befuddles me. If they think that this drawing is bullshit and it doesn't happen, well, we know that women are having to travel far distances to get abortions, and the poorest women in Texas don't have that option, so they have to seek other options. It is fortunate that there is an abortion pill that can be bought online now. In 2015, when Texas first started restricting women's rights, there were surveys done that showed between 100,000 and 240,000 Texas women between the ages of 18 and 49 have tried to end their pregnancy by themselves. The woman in this illustration is bleeding to death because she accidentally pierced her uterus with a sharp wire coat hanger. This is not acceptable public health policy, and these pro-life vegan atheists should be ashamed of themselves. This is a picture of a woman whose institutions and neighbors have turned against her. She would feel like the medical field is off limits for her because as a second-class citizen, it was illegal for her to get medical help when she was pregnant. Natalism becomes the law of the land, enforced at the point of a gun. As we are now already seeing in Texas, a woman was arrested and charged with murder for giving herself an abortion. The charges were later dropped, but the fact that she was arrested and charged and had to sit in a jail cell for an abortion is shocking.
I wanna burn a damn church down, lock down Bridge Neck. We burn some plane, that's the fucking